Tonight, on the Sleep Scientist _S, we journey to a forgotten lighthouse on the edge of the world, where the sea whispers secrets and the stars remember your name. In this soothing, slow unfolding tale, you'll meet Noor, a quiet dreamer and gentle scientist who inherits more than just bricks and glass. She uncovers a mystery of light, time, and a beacon that doesn't just shine for ships, but for the stars themselves. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the waves of this story carry you. You're safe here. The tide is calm. And somewhere far above, a lighthouse dreams, just for you. Whispers by the Sea. The lighthouse had stood for more than 100 years. Its tall, round tower rose gently above the cliffs like a watchful guardian, overlooking the ocean with a quiet dignity. By day, it shone a steady light to guide ships safely to shore. But by night, when the world hushed, and the tide softened its voice, the lighthouse began to dream. It wasn't the usual kind of dream. You see, this lighthouse didn't dream of ships or storms or seagulls. No, its dreams were made of stars. Long ago, when it was first built, the lighthouse was given a heart, not a beating, human heart, but something gentle and glowing. A heart that let it feel the wind, hear the waves, and wonder about the world beyond the sky. And so, each night, while everyone else slept, the lighthouse tilted its great glass eye upward and whispered wishes to the stars. Not far from the lighthouse lived a young girl named Noor. She was curious and kind, with a quiet soul that often felt out of place in the noisy world. Every evening, she would visit the cliffs with a notebook in her hand. While the world raced around her, Noor found comfort in the stillness, especially near the lighthouse, which she believed had secrets of its own. One evening, as the sea mist curled around her ankles and the sky turned velvet blue, Noor sat beneath the lighthouse and heard something strange. It wasn't the crashing of waves. It wasn't the cry of seabirds. It was a voice. Faint. Distant. Gentle. Like a memory wrapped in moonlight. She looked up. The lighthouse's great light was quiet that night, dimmed not by power failure, but by longing. And then she heard it again. A whisper. I wonder what it feels like, to float among the stars. Noor's breath caught. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but wonder. Did you say something? She asked, half laughing to herself. The whisper came again, softer this time, like the sea speaking through wind. I see them every night. But I've never touched one. Never been close. Just light, from far away. The voice was not human. It felt old. Wistful. Like an echo that had waited a century to be heard. Noor placed her hand on the cool stone of the lighthouse. It's okay, she said softly. I've never touched the stars either. But maybe we can find a way. Together. And so began a most unusual friendship, between a girl who listened, and a lighthouse that dreamed. Every evening, as the tide rolled in and the stars emerged one by one, Noor would return with her notebook. She would sit beneath the tower and ask the lighthouse questions, about the stars, the sea, and the secret wishes it had never spoken aloud. In return, the lighthouse would whisper its thoughts and dreams, sharing what it had seen over the decades, lonely ships, glowing comets, and even nights when the moon seemed to rest just above its lantern room like a sleepy eye in the sky. Little by little, Noor's heart began to heal. And the lighthouse, once a silent keeper of light, began to feel seen, truly seen, for the very first time. A notebook full of stars. The wind was gentle that night, like a sigh brushing across the sea. Noor climbed the grassy hill with her notebook pressed close to her chest. The sky was already beginning to fill with stars, scattered like glittering seeds across the navy blue fabric of the heavens. As always, the lighthouse stood waiting, tall, still, and faintly glowing. Its great lens turned slowly, not with urgency, but with a kind of quiet patience. Noor had begun to notice that on some nights, the lighthouse's light seemed softer, warmer, almost thoughtful. As if it was not just shining, but wondering. She reached the base of the lighthouse and sat on the same smooth stone as the night before. The sea murmured below. The pages of her notebook fluttered in the wind like tiny wings. "I brought something," Noor said aloud, unsure if the lighthouse could truly hear her, or if she was simply talking to the night. She opened the notebook and ran her fingers across the first page. It was filled with tiny pencil sketches, stars, constellations, and imaginary spacecraft shaped like birds and butterflies. There were notes, too, scribbled thoughts about time and light and the feeling of watching the sky for so long that you forgot the world below. "I draw these when I can't sleep," she said softly. "It helps, to imagine other places. Bigger places. Quieter ones." The lighthouse didn't answer at first. Its light continued its slow, steady spin. Then, after a few moments, a whisper came, barely more than the wind. "They're beautiful." Noor smiled. "Thank you. You've drawn the Orion constellation, and the Pleiades. And that one is made up, isn't it?" "Yes," Noor giggled. "That's the star whale. I imagined it last summer. It swims through space and sings lullabies to baby moons." The lighthouse let out a sound that wasn't quite laughter, but something close. A hum. A warm, contented vibration that passed through the stone and into Noor's bones like a lullaby made of light. For a long moment, they were both quiet, just listening to the tide, the wind, and the distant hush of stars whispering to the earth. Finally, Noor looked up and asked, "Do you remember the first star you ever saw?" The lighthouse hesitated. Its light slowed, then brightened faintly, as though recalling something long buried. "Yes," it whispered. "I was young, new. The sky was different then. Fewer ships. Fewer lights on the land. But the stars, oh, they were everywhere. One night, there was a comet. It came so close, I thought it would touch my glass. I reached for it, not with arms, but with longing. I think I've been reaching ever since." Noor felt something stir in her chest. She looked at the great tower and saw not just metal and stone, but something, tender. Ancient. Alive. "I'll help you," she said quietly. "We'll reach them together." The lighthouse did not reply. But for a brief, beautiful moment, its light flared just a little brighter, like a heart beating in the dark. And Noor sat beneath it, drawing constellations and dreams on her pages, as the sea breathed below and the stars kept watch above. The secret room at the top. The next night, the sky was cloudless, velvet dark, with stars shining as if they'd been polished just for her. Noor returned to the lighthouse again, carrying her notebook, a small thermos of warm tea, and a question in her heart she hadn't quite put into words yet. As she climbed the spiral staircase inside the lighthouse, its iron steps winding upward like a sleeping snake, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a faint breeze where there should have been stillness. And the soft scent of something ancient. Not dust, not rust, but memory. At the top, instead of the lantern room where the great light rotated slowly, she found something surprising. A door. It hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had, but only now was she ready to see it. Noor reached out. The brass handle was cool against her fingers. She hesitated, then turned it gently. Click. The door creaked open, and behind it was a room she had never imagined. It was round, lined entirely with shelves, each one filled not with books, but with objects. Some glowed faintly, like fireflies caught in jars. Others ticked or shimmered or spun in place. One looked like a snow globe, but inside was a swirling galaxy. She stepped inside, her footsteps muffled by a soft, star-patterned rug. On a pedestal in the center of the room sat a large, old book. Its cover was deep blue, like the ocean at midnight, and etched with silver lines that formed constellations. Noor ran her fingers over it, and the book opened on its own. The pages turned themselves, slow and deliberate. And then stopped. The story that appeared was not written in ink, but in starlight. Letters that shimmered and danced as if they were alive. Noor couldn't read the words exactly, but she felt them. To every eye that dreams upward, to every heart that listens in silence, the stars speak, if you know how to hear. Just then, the lighthouse whispered again. You found it. Noor turned slowly. What is this place? It's a memory chamber, the lighthouse replied. Every lighthouse dreams, though few remember how. This room holds all the dreams I've ever had. Every ship I've guided. Every storm I've watched. Every star I've wished on. Noor felt tears prick her eyes, not out of sadness, but wonder. The kind of awe that fills you up until it spills quietly over. This is your soul, she said softly. Isn't it? The lighthouse's light pulsed once, gently. And now it's yours, too. You've listened. You've believed. You've brought stories of your own. That is the truest science, observation, and wonder. Noor stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the quiet dreams of a guardian of light. She closed her eyes and listened, not just with her ears, but with her heart. And in the silence, she heard something new. A lullaby. Ancient and bright. The music of stars. The starlit visitor. The next evening, Noor returned to the lighthouse, her steps lighter than ever before. Outside, the waves whispered lullabies to the shore. The stars shimmered in their quiet patterns, and the lighthouse beacon turned slowly, casting its soft circle of light across the sea. But tonight, the air felt different. As Noor reached the top of the lighthouse and entered the secret memory chamber, she found something waiting for her. Not a dream. Not a whisper. A visitor. At first, she wasn't sure if it was real, a figure wrapped in a robe of soft silver, almost like moonlight itself. The stranger had no clear face, just a warm presence, as if made from mist and starlight. Noor blinked. Who are you? The figure tilted its head gently. A voice floated toward her, calm, melodic, like a night wind passing through leaves. I am a star guide. One of many. I visit places where the boundary between dreaming and knowing grows thin. Noor's heartbeat slowed, soothed by the visitor's rhythm. She didn't feel fear, only calm curiosity. And this lighthouse, it called to me, the star guide continued. You opened its dreaming heart. Few humans still can. They walked slowly together around the room. The shelves seemed to hum with a quiet glow in the star guide's presence. Noor found her voice. I always thought science was about facts. Data. Proof. But this place, it's different. It feels like science wrapped in wonder. The star guide's form shimmered slightly, as if nodding. True science is not cold, they said. It is curiosity made sacred. It is looking into the unknown with hope, not fear. They paused beside the old book on the pedestal, the one written in starlight. This lighthouse once dreamed of touching the stars, the star guide whispered. But it had no feet. No wings. Only light. Noor looked at the beacon above them, still rotating in its endless, patient circle. But maybe, she said, her voice soft with wonder, it was never meant to fly. Maybe it was meant to guide. The star guide turned to her, and though there were no eyes, Noor felt a smile. Perhaps you are the lighthouse's wings now. Then, with a final shimmer of light, the figure began to fade, leaving behind a single glowing feather on the floor. Noor picked it up. It pulsed once with a gentle warmth, like a heartbeat. Until next time, the voice said, distant but kind. And then there was only silence, and the stars. Noor stood quietly, holding the feather. The memory chamber glowed a little brighter now. It was not just a room of the past, but of becoming. The night stretched on outside, calm and eternal. Inside, Noor whispered to the lighthouse, "I'll help you dream again." The feather and the formula. Noor couldn't stop thinking about the glowing feather. It sat on her bedside table, softly pulsing like the lighthouse light itself, never too bright, never too dim. Just a quiet rhythm, like a heartbeat. A promise that the encounter hadn't been a dream. The next morning, she returned to the university lab, her mind full of questions. Could light carry memory? Could a feather left by a star guide hold data? Energy? Imagination? Most of her colleagues were busy with deadlines and grant proposals. But Noor had always believed that the most important discoveries weren't always the loudest. She brought the feather into the lab's spectral scanner, curious if it would reveal anything. The machine hummed gently. A soft light passed through the feather, and then, something unexpected. A pattern. Not a code. Not a frequency. A formula. It was delicate and incomplete, as if someone had started writing an equation halfway through a dream. Curves, symbols, something that hinted at starlight being more than light. As if light could remember. Noor stared at the screen, chills rising on her arms. This isn't just science," she whispered. "It's poetry made of numbers." Later that night, back at the lighthouse, she sat by the beacon with her journal. The waves outside crashed like soft thunder, steady and comforting. The sky was ink-black, sprinkled with stars like a spilled salt shaker. Noor opened her notebook, copying the feather's formula onto the page. But as her pen moved, the formula expanded. More lines came to her. As if her hand remembered something her mind didn't. It felt like she was tracing an ancient message, not from the past, but from the possible. The walls of the memory chamber responded. Shelves rearranged themselves. Old books glowed faintly. A telescope unfolded from the wall like a flower blooming. And then Noor heard a sound. The low hum of the stars. Not the sound of them burning. But something quieter, more spiritual. As though stars, like people, had voices only heard by those who listened slowly. She closed her eyes. Let the sound fill her. "You are beginning to understand," came a whisper, not from the star guide this time, but from within her own thoughts. She didn't know what the formula meant yet, not fully. But she sensed it was part of something bigger. Something that wasn't just about light. But about how dreams could travel. How memory could echo across galaxies. And how maybe, just maybe, this lighthouse really could touch the stars. The night the sky spoke back. The lighthouse stood still, wrapped in moonlight and the soft hush of waves. But inside, Noor couldn't sleep. She had placed the feather in a glass dome beside her bed. It pulsed gently, like it had its own rhythm, almost like it breathed. The formula it had revealed still lingered in her mind, dancing like a lullaby just out of reach. She sat near the great beacon once more, sketching constellations in her journal and cross-referencing the symbols from the feather's message. Every so often, she paused and looked up. Tonight, the stars felt closer. She couldn't explain it. Then, as the clock struck 2, the lighthouse beacon flickered, not from a mechanical error, but from something else. Something unseen. A second pulse followed, and then, a return signal. Noor's eyes widened. The lighthouse had received something. She turned to the main console. It was glowing with a soft hue, a blue she hadn't programmed into any of the settings. The telescope, still folded into the observatory wall, began to move again. This time it wasn't Noor directing it. It pointed itself toward the constellation Lyra. A quiet star nestled within the harp-shaped group began to shimmer with unusual intensity. Noor adjusted the lenses manually, and saw something that took her breath away. A pattern in the starlight. It blinked slowly, deliberately. A rhythm. A response. Long. Short, long, long. Pause. Short, short, long. A kind of Morse code? Noor held her breath. Was this a reply to the feather? Or to the formula? Was the lighthouse not just observing anymore, but conversing? She leaned closer, decoding the pattern, translating it symbol by symbol into something more meaningful. What formed was a single word. Remember. And suddenly, her body tingled with recognition. Not from her own memory, but something older. Something borrowed. As though she were waking from a dream someone else had begun thousands of years ago. She whispered aloud, "Remember what?" The telescope rotated again, gently this time, locking onto a distant nebula shaped like a spiral. Another word flickered through. Begin. Noor's heart beat faster. A feather, a formula, and now, a signal. Was this the beginning of something? She glanced out the tall lighthouse windows. Everything outside remained calm. The sea. The sky. The world. But inside her, a new journey had just awakened. She closed her eyes and listened again to the beacon's soft rhythm. This lighthouse, this strange old place, it wasn't just built to warn ships or scan the stars. It was built to remember. To communicate. And now, to guide her. The secret beneath the floorboards. The next morning, a mist had settled across the sea, softening the edges of the horizon until the sky and ocean melted into one. Noor awoke with a start, her dream still fresh in her mind. In it, the lighthouse had been glowing, not with light, but memory. As she padded barefoot across the wooden floor to the observatory, she paused. Her eyes had caught something strange. One of the floorboards was cracked, not in the way that comes with age, but as if something had pressed up from underneath. Curious, she knelt and tapped the board. It gave a soft, hollow knock. A compartment? She fetched her toolkit and gently pried it open. Inside lay a sealed tin box, tarnished by salt and time. The lid was etched with unfamiliar symbols, some resembled constellations, others felt like musical notes. She opened the box slowly. Inside was a bundle of old parchment, brittle yet carefully preserved. Atop them rested a small brass compass, but unlike any she'd seen. Its needle didn't point north. It spun, ever so gently, toward the spiral nebula the telescope had pointed at last night. The parchment pages told a story. Not in words, but in diagrams, spirals, feathers, lighthouses surrounded by stars, and strange machines that seemed to tune into the frequency of the universe. One page stood out, it was a map. But not of any place on Earth. It showed the solar system, with one additional orbit. A faint, dotted line, leading beyond Neptune. Next to it, the feather symbol appeared again, beside a label written in looping, forgotten handwriting. The listening planet. Noor's breath caught. She suddenly remembered what the message in the starlight had said. Remember. Begin. Could this be what she was meant to begin? A quest, not just of discovery, but of memory? She carefully lifted the compass. It pulsed faintly, aligning not with Earth's poles, but with something far beyond. She stood and looked out the lighthouse window again. This place, this lighthouse, had been more than a building. It was a vessel. A beacon. A memory keeper. She wasn't just a scientist now. She was a listener. And whatever mystery this lighthouse had been waiting to share, it had chosen her. The listening planet. That evening, as the lighthouse bathed in soft amber light, Noor sat cross-legged on the observatory floor. The strange map from the hidden box lay open before her, its unfamiliar orbit circling something deep in the darkness, beyond the known planets. The feather symbol shimmered faintly in the lamp's glow, and she couldn't stop staring at the label etched beside it. The listening planet. It whispered to her in the silence. But what did it mean? She placed the unusual compass at the center of the map. As if drawn by an invisible thread, its needle gently turned, not toward Earth's magnetic north, but toward the spiral constellation she had seen last night. She whispered, almost without realizing. "Are you still watching?" Suddenly, the telescope emitted a quiet mechanical hum. The gears moved on their own, and the lens slowly tilted toward the open sky. Noor's heart raced, but not from fear. This felt right. Like the lighthouse was waking up after a long sleep. She adjusted the focus and peered through the eyepiece. At first, she saw only stars. Distant, cold, beautiful. But then, something changed. A faint pulse of light blinked back at her. Not a star. Not a planet. Something in between. She recorded the signal in her notebook. It repeated every 11 seconds. Not random. Not natural. A pattern. She cross-checked the frequency against old data archives she'd brought with her, no match. This wasn't in any existing radio telescope data. It was unique. She turned to the parchment again. One symbol near the mysterious orbit showed a tuning fork. Next to it, another feather. Feathers again. As if this message had wings. Was this planet not just listening, but singing back? A thought bloomed in her chest like a rising tide. What if the stars weren't just to be studied, but spoken to? Noor looked around the circular observatory, the wood and metal, the lenses and mirrors. It had all been built by someone who believed the sky could answer. And now, it was her turn. She opened her notebook and wrote just 3 words beneath the signal pattern. "We are listening." Then she leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the hum of the lighthouse wrap around her like a lullaby. Out beyond the sea, beyond the stars, something waited. And it had heard her. The signal keeper. Rain fell gently the next morning, tapping softly against the domed roof of the lighthouse like fingers on a drum. The ocean beyond rolled in slow motion, as if the entire world had taken a breath and decided to hold it. Inside, Noor sat by the telescope, cradling a warm cup of tea and watching the blinking pattern on her notebook. 11 seconds between each pulse. Still steady. Still, waiting. All night, it had continued. A heartbeat from something far, far away. But why now? Why her? She decided to call it the signal keeper. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just sending light. It was sending memory. She could feel it in her bones, in the way her dreams had changed. Last night, she dreamt she was floating in the sky, not falling, not flying, just hovering. Around her, stars shifted like a living map. One of them blinked, then another. When she looked down, she saw the lighthouse below, but it was glowing, and not from its lantern. From within. She woke up certain that the signal wasn't random. It was part of a language. Maybe ancient. Maybe universal. A language of rhythm and time. She spent the day writing down possibilities. A welcome message? A warning? A call? The symbols from the map offered little help. But when she laid the compass over the parchment again, something curious happened. This time, the needle spun gently and came to rest pointing directly at a curve labeled with unfamiliar characters, like waves stitched into a spiral. Noor traced her finger across it and found a single English word scratched beneath it. Remember. She froze. Remember what? She whispered. Her mind jumped to the telescope's former keeper, the unnamed scientist who once stood here, under this same dome, staring into the unknown. She hurried to the box where she had found the old maps, hoping to uncover more. Tucked deep in the lining was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, addressed simply. To the next watcher. With trembling hands, Noor opened it. Inside was a letter, written in looping, careful handwriting. If you found this, the signal has returned. I don't know what it wants, only that it stopped when I stopped believing. You must listen. Not just with ears, but with memory. There is something the stars want us to remember. Don't let the silence win. Let the lighthouse speak. J.A. The initials struck a strange chord. Had she heard of them before? The rain eased into mist outside, and Noor looked up at the dim light filtering through the dome. Something was awakening. She returned to the telescope and tuned it further. A faint shift in frequency. The pulses began to change. 11 seconds, now 10. A countdown? Or an opening? She set her notebook down and whispered again into the quiet. I remember. And for the briefest second, the signal stuttered, then blinked twice in rapid succession. It had heard her. The map beneath the floorboards. The night deepened around the lighthouse like velvet, the sea outside glistening under a moonless sky. Noor sat beside the telescope again, but this time, she wasn't just waiting, she was listening. The signal had responded. Not with words, not exactly, but with acknowledgement. It was like brushing fingers in the dark and finding another hand already reaching back. But why her? And what was she meant to remember? She studied the letter from J.A. again, whispering the words over and over like a spell. Don't let the silence win. Suddenly, she felt it again, that low hum beneath the floor. Faint, rhythmic, and warm like a pulse. She knelt on the wooden boards, pressing her ear against them. Thud, thud, pause. Thud, thud. It matched the signal's new rhythm. Her heart pounded as she remembered the hollow sound beneath one of the floorboards, the one she'd always meant to check. She stood, hurried to the kitchen drawer, and returned with a small crowbar. Carefully, she pried up the edge. Dust billowed. And then, something solid. Wrapped in cloth, tucked in the darkness beneath the floor, was a weathered metal tube. Noor pulled it out, unwrapping layer after layer until she uncovered an old cylindrical canister. Inside, she found a map, but not like the others. This one wasn't of oceans or stars. It was of the lighthouse itself. Blueprints. Scribbled with notes in a precise, narrow hand. And at the bottom corner, those same initials again, J.A. The diagram detailed secret compartments, forgotten passageways, and at the very center, beneath the main chamber, a circle labeled Memory Chamber. She traced her finger along the tiny spiral symbols on the page. Beneath the drawing, in faded ink, a final note. It remembers more than we do. Goosebumps danced across her skin. Was the lighthouse more than just a building? She looked around, suddenly aware of how the walls felt. The beams creaked not from wind, but as if shifting under some invisible force. The telescope above almost hummed, as though it too had secrets waiting to be told. With flashlight in hand, Noor followed the map's lines to a hatch behind the supply closet. It took effort, but the old bolts loosened. Beneath the floor, she found a narrow stairwell, spiraling downward. She descended. Stone walls surrounded her, rough and cold. The flashlight flickered once, then stabilized. The air smelled of salt, dust, and something else. Ozone. As if lightning had once passed through here. At the bottom of the stairs, she found it. A round, domed room. Small. Empty, except for the walls, which were covered with panels. Symbols. Dials. And at the very center, a raised pedestal with a strange brass dish, like an ear, tilted skyward. Noor stepped closer. The dish vibrated softly. She whispered, not knowing why. What do you remember? And the panel beside her lit up. A projection danced above the dish, a swirl of stars, memories, lights moving backward in time. She saw the night Galileo first pointed a telescope at the sky. She saw nebulae blooming like flowers. She saw J.A., the previous keeper, watching, waiting, just as she now did. And in the last flicker of the memory, she saw herself younger, standing outside the lighthouse as a child, peering up at its tower. A voice, soft as wind and memory, whispered in her mind. You were always meant to return. The girl and the telescope. The projection flickered, then slowly dissolved into a shower of stardust. Noor stood there in silence, her hand still resting on the brass pedestal. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her younger self had appeared in the memory. A child outside the lighthouse, watching its light turn slowly in the night sky. She had no memory of ever being here before moving in this summer. And yet, the image had felt real. The ocean wind. The smell of salt and lavender. The little red scarf the girl wore. Noor had owned that exact scarf when she was 8. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the dish. You were always meant to return. What did that mean? Who had said it? Suddenly, the chamber seemed to hum with energy. The panels on the walls shifted again, rearranging symbols into something new. A diagram, an old star chart. Not of the sky above, but of a specific sky. One that only appeared once every 400 years. A note flickered beneath it. Window approaching. Prepare the signal. Noor's breath caught. The map, the whispers, the telescope, all of it was building to something. The stars were aligning, literally, and the lighthouse was getting ready to send another message. Not just a listening post, a transmitter. But what kind of signal? And to whom? She climbed back up the winding stair, the map in one hand, her flashlight in the other. When she reached the living room, the clock had struck well past midnight. The telescope's gears were moving again on their own. Adjusting as if sensing the incoming alignment. Noor stepped up to the lens and peered through it. The sky was impossibly clear. Through the glass, she could see a small cluster of stars that hadn't been visible earlier. Now they gleamed like silver teardrops in a bowl of ink. And right there, just beneath the cluster, a strange shimmer, like light bending where it shouldn't. She whispered. Hello? And for the first time, the telescope responded out loud. Not in words. But in a soft musical tone, like wind chimes echoing through deep space. The vibration moved through the wood of the tower, into her feet, into her ribs, into her bones. A soft pulse, slow and rhythmic. A pattern. One she knew. As if the universe itself had sung her lullabies long ago, and now was singing them back. She closed her eyes. Images bloomed behind her eyelids, dreamlike but vivid. A spacecraft, small and organic, floating near a gas giant. An alien forest under twin moons. A door made of light, opening inward. And then, a lighthouse. Not hers. But identical. Standing on the edge of an alien sea. Beaming light toward her. She opened her eyes, heart thudding like thunder. This was never just about watching the stars. The lighthouse had been part of a network, a quiet constellation of observers. Watching. Remembering. Waiting for the moment when the sky would open and the right question would be asked. Noor ran to her desk. On the back of the map, she began scribbling symbols she saw in her mind's eye. A response. A message. Something the dish below would understand. And in the margin, she wrote. This is Noor. I remember you now. A message through the sky. The wind had quieted outside. The waves still lapped against the rocks far below, but the storm had passed. In its place came silence, thick, velvet, expectant. Inside the lighthouse, Noor's desk was covered in notes and symbols. She sat cross-legged on the floor beside the great telescope, a warm blanket wrapped around her shoulders and a steaming mug of chamomile tea forgotten at her side. In front of her lay the map. The star chart had begun glowing faintly, not bright, not loud, just a gentle shimmer, as though moonlight were caught in its ink. Noor had traced the constellation that had appeared earlier, the one from the memory. Then she traced another, the cluster of stars she'd seen through the telescope. They matched perfectly. This was no coincidence. Somewhere, something had built this place to receive those exact stars. A pattern. A beacon. A signal. Noor took a deep breath. She carried the map down to the dish chamber below, her steps slow and reverent. The brass pedestal stood waiting, like an ancient altar. The symbols on it had changed again, aligning with what she had written on her map. "Do you wish to respond?" it asked, this time not with sound, but with glowing words that scrolled softly across the air. Noor didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said aloud. "I do." The dish hummed to life. Its panels unfolded slowly, petal by petal, like a strange mechanical flower waking under the stars. The entire room filled with quiet vibrations, as though tuning itself to the universe. A golden filament rose from the center, an antenna of sorts, glowing with gentle light. Noor placed her hand on the pedestal and began to speak. "My name is Noor. I live on a small blue planet. I've watched your light. And now, I'm ready to send mine back." The dish glowed brighter, capturing her voice not in sound, but in intent, her feelings, her thoughts, her memories. The way the wind felt the night she first arrived. The hum of the telescope. The feeling of seeing the stars and knowing they had seen her. All of it, bundled into a delicate signal, like a bottle set adrift in a cosmic sea. The antenna quivered once, and then released the message. A shimmer of golden light burst silently upward, straight through the tower's ceiling, passing through wood, glass, and stone as though they were mist. It shot into the sky like a wish, like a flare of memory returning home. Noor followed it up the stairs, back to the top. The telescope had stilled now. It pointed toward the exact same constellation she had addressed. Its lens glowed faintly, like an eye waiting for reply. She stood beside it and whispered. "Did you hear me?" Silence. A beat. Another. And then, a soft tone. The same wind chime music from before, but this time more complex. It wove in spirals, forming patterns Noor could feel more than hear. A reply. Not words. But understanding. Recognition. And deep beneath it, joy. As though something ancient and patient had waited so long, and now finally, someone had said hello. Tears filled Noor's eyes. Not from sadness, but wonder. The stars were not cold. They were not silent. They were listening. And now, they were answering. The sky's secret door. The lighthouse felt lighter that night, as if something hidden had exhaled at last. Noor sat by the telescope. Well past midnight, her gaze gently flicking between the telescope's shimmering lens and the star-swept sky. The air had a soft hum to it, like the world was breathing in rhythm with her thoughts. The message had been sent. And received. But it wasn't over. A pattern was forming, like footsteps echoing forward through time, leading her toward something even deeper. She could feel it in her chest, a quiet pulse calling her forward. Downstairs, the star map had changed again. One of the constellations had begun to shift. Its stars slowly realigned themselves, almost like a dance. Noor watched in awe as they formed an unfamiliar shape, a spiral within a spiral. At its center was a tiny flicker, like a doorway drawn in starlight. "A gateway," she whispered. But to where? She barely slept that night. When dawn broke, Noor walked the cliffs by the lighthouse, her notebook in hand, trying to understand. She wrote everything, every sound, every pattern she had heard in the reply. She drew the new star configuration again and again, testing different orientations, comparing it with old charts, until there it was. An ancient symbol. buried in the margins of an old astronomy book she'd brought with her, one she'd found years ago in her grandmother's attic. It was a symbol once used by travelers to mark places where the veil was thin. Places where one world touched another. She stood still for a long time. What if the lighthouse wasn't just a building? What if it was a threshold? As dusk fell, Noor returned to the pedestal chamber. This time, she brought the old book with her. She laid it beside the glowing dish and stared at the shifting shapes above it. Slowly, reverently, she spoke the symbol aloud. Asterion. The lights in the chamber blinked once. Then again. The floor beneath her began to shift, softly at first, then more boldly. A ring of ancient mechanisms revealed itself in the stone, surrounding the pedestal. The air grew warmer, buzzing faintly with energy. A column of light rose from the center of the room, tall, clear, and shimmering. Like a pillar of water turned to stars. Noor reached toward it, and as her fingers brushed the edge, she was no longer in the lighthouse. She was somewhere else. A vast, dark field stretched around her, filled with moving light, not stars, but memories, echoes, voices that sang in silence. Shapes floated gently overhead like ships in a slow current. It wasn't frightening. It felt welcoming. And there, in the center of it all, was the shape from her map, the spiral gate, now glowing softly before her. Noor stepped toward it, heart calm and eyes wide with wonder. The stars had not only answered her message. They had opened a door. And she, the sleepy scientist, was being gently invited through. The memory sea. Noor stood at the threshold of the spiral gate, heart steady, breath soft. Then, with a single step forward, she entered. What surrounded her now was unlike anything she could have imagined. She was floating, not falling, not flying, just, gently suspended in a world that shimmered like moonlight on water. All around her, translucent waves of light moved with the grace of thought. They weren't solid, but they held shape, and within them danced thousands of tiny golden particles, like fireflies lost in a dream. There was no floor beneath her, no ceiling above, just endless, shifting light that felt impossibly calm. It was not space. It was not a dream. It was memory. This was a realm built of echoes. Noor took a careful breath, and the air tasted like old stories, like paper and starlight, the scent of petrichor after rain, of night-blooming jasmine. Her thoughts slowed. Her heartbeat aligned with a deeper rhythm. And then, they came. Not creatures, exactly. Not people. But presences. Shapes moved in the distance, tall, elegant, luminous. They drifted through the memory sea like guardians of a library where every particle was a recorded thought. Their bodies seemed made of flowing script, lines of starlight weaving into shapes. One of them noticed her, tilted its head, and began to approach. Noor's instincts didn't scream or warn. They softened. She felt safe. The being stopped before her, and a soft voice filled her mind, not through sound, but through feeling. You followed the path. You listened. You remembered. I didn't know I was following anything, Noor whispered. I just kept looking up. The being's form shimmered gently. She felt approval, something between a smile and a sigh. You carry the dream, the voice said. The dream left behind when the skies first whispered to earth. The lighthouse was your invitation. Noor blinked. So I wasn't imagining it. The stars really were, reaching back. Always. But few listened slowly enough to hear. The light around them shifted, and suddenly a scene unfolded beside her, a spiral of glowing mist that settled into a vision, a young girl, cradling a broken telescope under a stormy sky. Her face was small, determined. Her hair wet from rain. It was Noor. A memory. From years ago. The voice continued. Even as a child, you searched. Not just the stars, but the spaces between them. You looked for the gentle things. The quiet patterns. That is what makes you ready. Noor's breath caught. Ready, for what? The light swirled again, and a new image appeared. A planet, blue, distant, beautiful, and around it, a ring of symbols forming like petals around a flower. They pulsed faintly, like heartbeats. To remember what Earth forgot. That it is not alone. That silence is never emptiness. It is waiting. It is love in rest. Tears welled in Noor's eyes. Not from fear. From awe. From peace. She understood now, this place wasn't for escape. It was for remembering. The stars had never been silent. Their messages were just, soft. Gentle. They had waited for someone quiet enough to hear them. The being reached out, one glowing, script-woven hand, and placed it over Noor's heart. You may return when you are ready. But now, you carry us. And just like that, the light began to dim. Noor felt herself slowly being drawn back. Through the memory sea. Through the spiral gate. Through the pillar of starlight. Until she was once again standing in the heart of the lighthouse, hands still outstretched, chest full of starlight and a story waiting to be shared. The whispering shells. The morning after Noor's journey through the memory sea was unlike any other. The lighthouse felt alive. Not in a frightening way, no creaking walls or strange phenomena, but with a kind of hush, as if it were waiting with bated breath. Noor moved slowly through the rooms, each step soft on the old wooden floorboards. Her fingertips trailed along the railing as she descended the spiral staircase. Light poured in from the eastern windows, casting golden ribbons across the floor. Outside, the sea was calm, mirroring the clouds like a sleeping mirror. She felt different. Lighter. Not empty, just, less burdened. Like something inside her had unfolded. She reached the bottom floor where her journals were still stacked on the table, their pages fluttering slightly as if stirred by an unseen breeze. As she sat down, she noticed something strange on the windowsill. A shell. But not just any shell. It shimmered with a soft blue glow, and etched along its curve were tiny markings, patterns so precise they almost looked carved by hand. She picked it up gently, and as she held it to her ear, she didn't hear the usual whoosh of ocean waves. She heard a voice. Very faint. Like a whisper beneath water. It said only a few words. Return at dusk. Noor looked around, half expecting someone to be there. But the room was still, and the lighthouse made no sound beyond the soft ticking of the clock. She turned the shell over in her hand, heart fluttering. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Wonder. Was the lighthouse sending her messages now? Was the memory sea still open, just beneath the surface of this reality? She stepped outside. The wind had picked up slightly, carrying with it the smell of salt and lavender. The rocky shoreline stretched wide and wild, and scattered all across it were dozens, maybe hundreds, of similar glowing shells. Each one whispered a different phrase. Some said, "We remember." The path glows in silence. She carries the echo. Noor spent hours listening. Writing. Sketching each shell, labeling each whisper. It was as though the lighthouse had become a translator for the cosmos, a storyteller using shells and sea and wind as its voice. And with every whisper, Noor's connection to the universe deepened. That evening, as the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows over the sea, she returned to the tower. The shell's message had been clear. Return at dusk. So she did. She climbed the spiral staircase with the same rhythm as before, the lantern in her hand casting soft light on the stone walls. At the top, the observatory dome had changed. The telescope, her faithful companion, now had subtle glimmers along its brass frame, as if it had absorbed starlight itself. She looked through it. and gasped. The sky was different. No longer just stars and blackness. Now, fine threads of light connected constellations, delicate filaments forming patterns she had never seen before. Like a map layered beneath the one she'd always known. It was a star map. But not one made by humans. It was older. Deeper. Woven with intention. She whispered aloud, "What are you showing me?" And the telescope responded. Not with sound, but with warmth. A pulse of gentle light at the eyepiece. A sense of calm. And in that moment, Noor realized something powerful. She was no longer just a scientist observing the stars. She was part of their memory now. A keeper of their quiet messages. A bridge between their dreams and Earth's forgotten awe. The language of stars. Noor barely slept that night. Not because she was restless or worried, but because her mind was wide awake in the gentlest way. She sat curled in a blanket by the observatory window, watching the stars shift slowly overhead, like old friends telling secrets in silence. In front of her, a large sheet of parchment was spread across the desk. She had begun to copy what she'd seen through the telescope, those glowing, thread-like connections that laced the sky like a celestial lacework. The patterns didn't match any human constellation chart. Not the ones from Babylon, not the Greeks, not even the modern sky catalogs she'd memorized. Noor dipped her pen in ink, then paused. How did one even begin to translate a map made by the stars themselves? She decided to treat it not as a puzzle, but as a language. A forgotten language. One meant not to be solved, but to be listened to. She labeled each glowing filament with a soft number, sketching them gently so as not to break their beauty. Then she noticed something curious: every 7 filaments, a small loop. And near each loop, one particular star always glowed brighter than the rest. A rhythm. A pattern. Like the stanzas of a poem, whispered across the galaxies. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the parchment as the wind brushed against the window. Somewhere far below, waves gently kissed the shore. And Noor imagined the sea listening too. With her lantern casting a sleepy glow beside her, she began reading the starlit pattern aloud, not as numbers or coordinates, but as a melody. Humming softly, following the arcs and loops as if they were musical notes. And to her astonishment, the telescope hummed back. A low, golden hum, barely audible, yet warm, like a sigh from a sleeping universe. It vibrated through the wood, through the air, and into Noor's very bones. Something within the lighthouse was awake again. And it understood her. She spent the rest of the night studying. Listening. Following the gentle rhythm. And by morning, she had a theory. These weren't just star maps. They were messages. Left not for the eyes, but for the soul. Each loop, each glowing star, formed a kind of phrase, not in words, but in feeling. A slow, starry language of memory and presence. Noor believed it was a kind of cosmic lullaby, written by the universe itself, reminding the dreamers of Earth. You are not forgotten. You are made of our light. We see you still. The realization brought tears to her eyes, not of sadness, but of comfort. She wasn't just a scientist anymore. She was a listener. A dream translator. And the stars, patient and luminous, had been waiting for someone to hear them again. That evening, as the sky turned a velvet blue, Noor returned to the top of the lighthouse. She looked through the telescope once more, this time not just as a researcher, but as a friend. And the stars greeted her. New filaments appeared, ones she hadn't noticed before. They pulsed slowly, drawing her gaze across the sky to a quiet, far-off corner. There, amidst the blackness, a shape began to form, a spiral nebula, glowing softly like a sleeping eye. It blinked once. Then vanished. Noor whispered to herself, "They're guiding me somewhere." And deep in her heart, she knew. The lighthouse wasn't just a tower by the sea anymore. It was a beacon for dreams. A place where the stars came home. The keeper before Noor. The lighthouse had always been there, standing watch over the edge of the world. But Noor had never asked who had kept it before her. That morning, after the stars had sung to her through the telescope, she wandered into the old archives room below the tower. Dust danced like whispers in the sunlight pouring through the narrow window. Here, the walls were lined with forgotten ledgers, leather-bound journals, and nautical maps so fragile they curled like dried petals. She hadn't noticed it before, but one journal rested alone on a shelf, unmarked, bound in deep green cloth. Noor opened it gently. The first page read, in faded gold ink. For the next dream listener. Elias Rahim, 1892. Her heart skipped. Someone else had known. Elias Rahim had been the lighthouse's keeper over a century ago. And as Noor read, she realized he had seen the same thing she now did, veins of light threading the sky, stars pulsing in patterns, and a telescope that occasionally breathed. But his words weren't scientific. They were soft, poetic, full of awe. He described the lighthouse not as a building, but as a bridge, between sky and sea, between solitude and starlight. Some nights, he wrote, I feel them calling. The stars do not speak in syllables, but in silence. If you sit still long enough, you hear everything. Noor smiled. It was as if Elias were sitting beside her now, whispering from across time. One entry in particular caught her attention. Dated November 3, 1892, it read. Tonight the sky shimmered with unfamiliar filaments, golden and blue. I followed them with the telescope and found her. A shape in the sky I cannot explain. A spiraled eye, blinking. Watching. I believe the stars are trying to remember something. Or someone. Noor's breath caught. That was exactly what she'd seen last night. The spiral nebula, the sleeping eye in the darkness. She closed the book and looked up at the telescope, her mind spinning with wonder. Across centuries, two scientists, two listeners, had witnessed the same secret in the sky. She ran her fingers along the brass of the telescope, whispering, You remember him, don't you? The telescope gave a faint vibration. A pulse of warmth. She smiled. Then you'll remember me too. That night, Noor lit a lantern and placed it by the telescope just as Elias had described in one of his entries. The lantern is not for light. It's a signal. A message that says, I am here. I am listening. She sat beside it, wrapped in a shawl, and waited. Above her, the stars aligned in their silent language. The filaments glowed. The patterns deepened. And for the first time, she felt like she wasn't just reading the sky. She was joining a conversation that had begun long before her, and would continue long after. The dream locked in glass. That night, the ocean was quieter than usual. Noor stood at the highest platform of the lighthouse, wrapped in her soft wool coat, with the journal of Elias Rahim open on her lap. A gentle breeze played with the edges of the pages as if the wind, too, was curious to read his words. There was an entry she couldn't stop thinking about, one where Elias had written. I've sealed the dream where it can be found only when the light forgets its purpose. Only a listener of stars will know when the time is right. What did that mean? She had read that line 3 times now, each time with a stronger sense that something was waiting inside the lighthouse. Something he had hidden. Not a metaphor. A real, secret place. The next morning, the fog rolled in thick. It dulled the horizon, muffled the cries of gulls, and made the sea feel impossibly far away. Noor wandered the tower's winding staircase, fingertips grazing the ancient walls. There were tiny indentations in the stone, marks left by time, tools, and maybe people long gone. But nothing stood out. Until she entered the lens room, the chamber just below the beacon where sunlight once refracted through a maze of glass. She stood still. There it was. A small panel, barely the width of a book, nestled behind the housing of the oldest lens. Almost invisible, unless you knew to look. And only if the lighthouse wasn't lit. When the light forgets its purpose. The fog had done just that. It had dimmed the beam. The light had, for once, paused its endless sweep across the sea. And now Noor saw what Elias had left behind. She pried the panel gently. It creaked. Dust drifted like slow-falling snow. Inside was a velvet-lined cavity. And resting in it, a glass sphere, no larger than a teacup. It shimmered faintly with hues of violet and silver. Stars, impossibly small, seemed to swirl inside it, like a galaxy in a jar. A note was attached to its base. To the one who listens as I once did. This is not a device, but a memory. Look into it only when you are ready to dream forward, not just backward. Noor's hands trembled slightly. This was Elias's final experiment. Not one of equations or instruments, but of hope. That evening, with the telescope pointed toward the same coordinates Elias had once recorded, Noor sat cross-legged and held the sphere to her eye. She expected reflections. Instead, she saw a floating landscape of soft nebulae, drifting quietly like slow-moving clouds of color. And within that space, a vision. Elias, young, standing beside the telescope. Smiling. Not at her, but forward, into time. And beyond him, visions of children learning under the stars. Future lighthouses on distant moons. Dreamers curled beside telescopes, notebooks open, hearts wide. It wasn't a dream in the past. It was a dream for the future. Noor lowered the sphere, tears quietly sliding down her cheeks. She wasn't alone in her watchfulness. She never had been. And now, she wasn't just a keeper of light or a scientist of sleep. She was a keeper of memory, and of dreams not yet dreamed. The signal through the dream. After discovering the memory sphere, Noor found herself changed, not just emotionally, but spiritually, as if a switch had quietly turned within her. It was the first time she felt like Elias wasn't a mystery to be solved. But a voice still speaking. Gently. Lovingly. Through science, and now, through dreams. But there was one thing left unexplored. In one of his final entries, Elias had written, "Signals need not always travel through cables, airwaves, or light. Some messages can only be delivered through the fragile fabric of sleep." This fascinated Noor. What would it mean to send a signal, not via technology, but through consciousness? Through the language of dreams? Could the mind be tuned, like an antenna? Could one soul truly reach another without a word? She began experimenting. First, she adjusted her meditation routine. Not just calming her body before sleep, but focusing her thoughts as if preparing to transmit. She visualized the old observatory. The stars above. The signal tower. And then she added something new, a phrase, silently repeated in her mind as she drifted into sleep. To the dreamers who listen, I am here. Night after night, she practiced. On the seventh night, something changed. Her dream became structured. No longer the hazy meanderings of a tired brain. It had form. Purpose. A quiet stillness at its center. She stood once more in the lighthouse, but it wasn't hers. The stairs were made of crystal. The ocean outside glittered with stars. And the air smelled like lavender and midnight rain. At the top of this dream lighthouse was someone waiting. He looked up as she entered. It was Elias. He smiled, not in surprise, but recognition. "Hello, Noor," he said gently. His voice was like a cello in a quiet room. She stepped forward, overcome with emotion. "I didn't know this was possible," she whispered. "I didn't either," he replied. But perhaps the universe listens when the heart is open enough. They didn't speak much. There was no need. He handed her a map, not of places, but of moments yet to come. Not predictions, but possibilities. Seeds of wonder. Theories no one had written yet. Stars that hadn't yet shined. And then he said, "You must wake now. The future needs you awake." Noor opened her eyes to morning light. In her lap was her notebook, open, with symbols she didn't remember writing. Ideas. Shapes. Equations not her own. She didn't understand them yet. But she would. In time. Because now she knew. Science wasn't just about discovering the universe. It was about listening to it. Even in sleep. Especially in sleep. And tonight, she would try again. Not to find Elias. But to reach someone else. Some dreamer who might need a light in the dark. A whisper from a distant shore. That night, Noor fell asleep with a peaceful stillness in her chest, a quiet hum that felt like both an invitation and a farewell. She didn't know if she would find Elias again. But something deep inside told her she wouldn't be alone. As sleep took her, the dream arrived not as a place, but as a sound. A single note, vibrating like a cello string plucked in an empty hall. Then another. Soon, it became a melody. A song built of starlight and soft wind. She followed the sound, weightless, drifting through darkness that shimmered like velvet sprinkled with diamonds. And then, on the far side of sleep, she saw it. A shoreline. Not Earth's. A silver sea lapped at sands that glowed blue under twin moons. Trees with translucent leaves swayed in an unseen breeze. And standing by the edge of the water was a child. He looked no older than 8. Hair like ink, eyes like galaxies. When he saw Noor, he didn't flinch or run. He simply smiled. "You're the lightkeeper," he said. Noor blinked. "Do you know me?" He nodded. "I've seen your lighthouse." She stepped closer. "But, this isn't Earth. Is it?" The child looked up at the twin moons. "No. My world is far. Very far. But light travels. Dreams travel too, if they're brave enough." Noor knelt. "Why did I find you?" "Because I asked," he said. "I've been sending messages. Every night. I call out with my mind. My mother says there's no one listening." He looked down. "But I thought maybe someone was." Noor felt a lump in her throat. "There was," she whispered. They sat in silence for a long time. No questions. No need to understand everything. Only the simple miracle of being heard. When the child spoke again, it was soft. "Do you think we'll meet again?" Noor smiled. "Yes. Dreams remember." He stood and reached into his pocket. He handed her a tiny stone, clear as glass, warm to the touch. "Take this. So you don't forget." When Noor awoke, the dream was gone. But in her palm, she found the stone. Perfectly round. Cool now, but real. She stared at it, stunned. Then she did what any scientist would. She labeled it. Dated it. And placed it beside the memory sphere. A new kind of artifact. Not just from space. Not just from time. But from between worlds. And in the back of her notebook, she wrote a single sentence. "We are not alone, not in the universe, and not in sleep." The dream signal. Noor spent the next few days in a kind of quiet wonder, her mind turning gently like the lenses of a telescope adjusting to new light. The stone from the dream world lay on her desk. Not glowing. Not vibrating. Just, there. Perfect and silent. proof that some part of sleep could touch waking life. But to Noor, it wasn't enough to be a receiver. She wanted to be a sender, too. That afternoon, she climbed the winding stairs of the lighthouse and unlocked the old equipment shed. Dust floated through sunbeams as she pulled open drawers, gently handling wires, switches, and forgotten tools. What if, she thought, the lighthouse could do more than guide ships? What if it could guide dreams? She called it Project Lucid. A system built to translate thoughts, memories, and feelings into light, a soft pulse that could be sent into the sky like a message in a bottle. Every night, she tuned the settings. Adjusted frequencies. Calibrated warmth, rhythm, and color. She wasn't sure what exactly she was doing, no manuals existed for dream transmitters. But she trusted the process. Because science, like dreaming, often begins with a question no one knows how to ask. On the 7th night, she activated the beacon. It didn't shine like a spotlight. Instead, it glowed. Soft. Blue-white. A shimmer that faded into the night sky like fog dissolving into moonlight. And in her heart, Noor whispered not a word, but a feeling. You're not alone. You are remembered. You are loved. The signal ran for 1 hour. Then it went quiet. Noor watched the stars in silence. She didn't expect a reply. But deep in her bones, she knew that somewhere, across a sea of stars, on a distant shore, a small child might be falling asleep, and feeling a warmth he didn't understand. A warmth that said someone was listening. And so the lighthouse became more than a keeper of light. It became a guardian of dreams. A place where wonder was not just studied, but shared. Echoes from the ether. Far beyond Noor's world, beyond the swirl of galaxies and the hush of nebulae, there was a small moon orbiting a sleeping planet. It had no name. Its skies were deep violet, and its surface shimmered with crystals that grew like flowers made of frost and light. No one lived there. At least, not in the way Noor understood life. But something watched. Something waited. When Noor's signal reached that moon, years of light compressed into a single, shimmering pulse, it passed through the crystal fields like a whisper through wind chimes. The crystals sang. Their delicate, ancient tones resonated with the feeling Noor had sent. You are not alone. You are remembered. You are loved. And for the first time in eons, the moon stirred. Not with motion, but with memory. A soft hum began to rise from beneath its surface, like a sigh, like a lullaby once forgotten. In the center of the moon, nestled between crystal roots, lay a dormant mind. It was not a creature. Not a person. It was an awareness, ancient and peaceful, sleeping for 1,000 millennia. The dream signal reached it gently, as if brushing a child's hair away from their face. And that sleeping mind opened one thought. A single thought. There is someone out there, looking up, just like I once did. The moon began to reflect light, not from a sun, but from itself. Its crystals glowed in soft waves, like breathing. And those waves moved through space, not as light or radio, but as something stranger. A reply. Back in the lighthouse, Noor slept soundly that night, her dream wrapped in music she'd never heard before. A crystalline hum that echoed across time and space. And though she didn't yet understand it, she felt something new stirring in her soul. Someone had answered. A song beneath the stars. That night, Noor awoke before dawn, not with alarm, but with a sense of wonder. Something gentle had pulled her from sleep. She sat up in her lighthouse bed, wrapped in soft blankets, the early sky still deep indigo, dotted with faint stars. The sea outside her window was perfectly still, as if listening. And then, she heard it. Faint, crystalline tones, like a lullaby sung by light itself. Not loud. Not near. But clear. Beautiful. Otherworldly. Noor held her breath. The melody wasn't coming from her instruments. It wasn't from Earth. It was a memory, carried on waves of light and dream, returning to her like a paper boat she once set afloat and never expected to see again. She ran to the observatory, barefoot and warm with sleepy curiosity. Her telescope still pointed skyward, perfectly aligned with the coordinates of the moon from which she had once sent her message. On the screen, nothing out of the ordinary. Just stars. Just blackness. But in her heart, the message shimmered. She felt it, not in her ears, but behind her eyes, in the spaces between her thoughts. The crystals were singing back. "We remember you," they seemed to hum. "And we are listening." Noor closed her eyes and let the feeling wash over her. It wasn't science in the traditional sense. It wasn't a discovery she could write about in a paper or display on a screen. But it was real. A response. A gentle hand reaching back across the void. And something told her this was only the beginning. The stars, long silent, had started to whisper. She stayed there, in the quiet tower, wrapped in starlight and thought. The melody slowly faded into the hush of morning. But her heart remembered every note. And when the sun finally rose, painting gold across the sea, Noor whispered to herself. "We're not alone out there. And maybe we never were." The language of light. The morning unfolded like a page turning in a dream, slow, golden, full of promise. Noor sat in the observatory, her notebook open in front of her, though her pen lay still beside it. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure how to begin. How do you describe a song that didn't come from Earth? How do you write down feeling? She had always trusted in numbers, graphs, patterns of motion and energy. But the melody that visited her the night before wasn't written in any code she knew. It was ancient, elegant, and entirely unfamiliar. Still, it left behind something. Not a recording. Not a waveform. But an impression, like fingerprints on her thoughts. She looked at the telescope, its lens quiet now, staring into the daylight. Could it have captured anything? She replayed the data logs. One moment, silence. The next, a burst, just a flicker, in the readings. Like a heartbeat. Or a pulse. And in that pulse was light. But not like any wavelength she'd ever catalogued. It moved in waves that shimmered between colors, like it couldn't decide what hue it wanted to be. Noor enhanced the signal slowly, respectfully, afraid too much amplification would scare it away. And there, hidden in the brightness, were shapes. Not letters. Not numbers. But patterns. Spirals. Echoes of the golden ratio. Repeating crescents. Something like a language. She pressed her hand to her chest. Her heart was beating faster now. But not from fear. From recognition. Whatever this was, it had been waiting. Not just to be found, but to be understood. And Noor, sitting in her lighthouse that dreamed of the stars, felt chosen. Not in a grand, epic way. But gently. As if the cosmos had tapped on her shoulder and said, "You see us clearly. So we'll speak to you." She spent the rest of the day not trying to decipher it, but listening. To the pauses. The curves. The warmth in the shapes of light. She even sang to it, soft hums under her breath. And when she did, something in the pulse responded, like a reflection rippling across an unseen pond. That night, Noor left the telescope exactly where it was. She turned off the screens. Blew out the candles. And sat in the silence with her tea, watching the stars begin to bloom in the sky. She smiled, speaking only once, barely louder than a whisper. "I don't need to understand everything tonight. But I'll be here when you're ready." Echoes from the future. The wind was gentle that evening, brushing past the lighthouse like a lullaby. Noor sat in the old rocking chair beside the round window, her favorite place at night. The stars above were bright and steady, and the sea below whispered in its sleep. She held a notebook in her lap, though she hadn't written a word in hours. Because something else had returned. Not the melody exactly, but something deeper. An echo. A soft hum, not heard by ears, but felt just behind the ribs, near the center of her being. She closed her eyes and listened, not as a scientist, but as something more ancient. A storyteller. She saw a desert. Endless sands glowing under two moons. Tall structures, curved like seashells, stood on the horizon. And then, a figure. Familiar. It was her. But older. Or, not older. Different. Wearing a long silver robe that moved like water. Eyes soft. Tired. Kind. This Noor was standing before a room of children. But they weren't human, not exactly. They shimmered at the edges, their skin lit from within, their laughter weightless. Long ago, this future Noor said, there lived a lighthouse on a planet far from the center of stars. It dreamed of knowing the universe. So it built a mirror, and looked up. The children listened, glowing brighter. One of them raised a hand. Was the lighthouse lonely? Noor, the Noor telling the story, smiled. Yes. But only until it realized, stars don't need to speak in words to befriend you. Noor opened her eyes back in the lighthouse, her heart tender and still. Was it a dream? A memory from the future? A message sent backwards through light? She didn't know. But she did feel something unmistakable. Purpose. Not fame. Not proof. Not applause from the scientific world. But something quieter. Something meant for the heart. Maybe the universe had sent her glimpses of the future because she needed to know that her work, her patience, her wonder, mattered. That in some distant time, someone would tell stories about a lighthouse that dreamed. That night, before falling asleep in the cozy nest of blankets and moonlight, Noor lit a single candle. She placed it in the windowsill. Not to see with. But to be seen. A signal to the stars. A whisper to the future. I hear you. I see you. I believe in you. And somewhere, perhaps on a moonlit dune in a faraway tomorrow, a child smiled without knowing why. The star map beneath the floorboards. Noor awoke just before dawn. The sky outside was still a dark indigo, brushed with the faintest hue of morning. But something had stirred her, something quiet and ancient. A pull, like a forgotten thread being gently tugged from the edge of a dream. Wrapped in her robe, she padded barefoot down the spiraling wooden stairs. Her footsteps were soft, careful not to wake the lighthouse more than necessary. It, too, seemed half asleep, humming low and contented. When she reached the study, something caught her attention. There was a loose floorboard near the bookshelf. She had noticed it before, but in the way we notice things and then forget them again. But now it called to her. She knelt, pried it up gently, and gasped. Beneath the plank was a bundle of papers, bound with twine and stained by time. The pages were thin, almost translucent. Drawings danced across them, fine, hand-drawn sketches of stars, planets, and constellations she'd never seen in any modern atlas. But stranger still were the words, scribbled in flowing ink. These stars will not be seen for another 1,000 years. But they are already watching us. A Watcher of Light, 1842. Noor's heart fluttered. Was it a map of future constellations? She traced the markings with her fingertips, the way one might trace a memory or the edge of a dream. These weren't random notes. They were predictions, visions of a night sky that hadn't yet arrived. The wind outside picked up slightly, whispering along the tower walls. She sat cross-legged on the floor, the bundle open before her, and let the quiet settle deep around her like a shawl. The diagrams felt alive. Moving. Breathing. Could the lighthouse have known? She whispered aloud. And as if in answer, the golden pendulum clock across the room ticked once, softly, but firmly. She smiled. Not everything needed explaining. Some discoveries were simply meant to be received, not understood. Hours passed as she gently copied the celestial patterns into her own notebook. She'd match them against the current sky later, but for now, she simply absorbed the shapes and lines, like lullabies in star form. It felt like she was restoring something that had been waiting, patiently, for over a century to be seen again. Noor felt the tiniest tear slip down her cheek, though she didn't feel sad. Quite the opposite. She felt trusted. Like she had been chosen, not to conquer the stars, but to listen to them. To tend to their stories like a gardener tends wildflowers. By the time the sun finally rose and scattered light across the ocean, Noor sat in the study with a full heart and a map that no telescope had ever captured. And the lighthouse, as always, stood beside her. Quiet. Watching. Dreaming. A visit from the starlit stranger. The night had returned. A silvery hush blanketed the world around the lighthouse. Noor sat curled on the armchair in the observatory room, her notebook full of hand-drawn constellations resting on her lap. The mysterious star map she had found beneath the floor still lingered in her thoughts, like a candle left burning at the edge of sleep. Outside, the sky was clear and wide. Stars shimmered like ancient eyes, each blinking with secrets they'd carried for eons. Then came a knock. It was soft. One knock only. Noor sat still. The lighthouse never got visitors, especially not at this hour. Another knock, just one, echoed through the wooden spiral of the staircase. Slowly, Noor descended, each step creaking like a whispered word. She reached the heavy front door and gently opened it. There stood a man in a long dark coat, lined with silvery threads that sparkled faintly, as though starlight had been woven into the fabric. His hair was silver, not white, and his eyes, they were the kind of deep blue that suggested they had seen entire galaxies rise and fade. He smiled softly. "You've been reading the stars." Noor nodded, not quite sure how she knew it was safe, but knowing all the same. "I found the map," she said quietly. The man stepped inside without a sound. The lighthouse didn't protest. It welcomed him, in that wordless way Noor had come to recognize. He sat across from her in the observatory, gazing out at the sky. "That map," he said, "was drawn by someone like me. Someone who listens to what the stars whisper, not just what they shine." He explained that he belonged to a forgotten guild, Watchers of Light, they called themselves, who had once quietly wandered the earth, recording glimpses of skies that hadn't yet formed. They listened to future constellations the way composers listen to unfinished melodies. But the world grew louder, he said. People stopped listening to quiet things. He paused, turning to Noor. "But you listened." Noor blinked slowly, her heart thudding softly beneath her sweater. This wasn't a dream. Not quite. But it wasn't the ordinary world either. It was somewhere between, where sleepy minds and starlit secrets met. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small device. It looked like a compass, but instead of pointing north, it pulsed toward the sky. "This will help you," he said. "It won't show direction. It shows possibility." He handed it to her like a gift, wrapped in silence. Then, just as gently as he arrived, he stood and walked to the door. "There are more maps," he said with a smile. "Some are hidden in sound. Others, in dreams." Noor nodded, unable to find words. He gave her one last look, warm and certain. "Keep listening." And then, he was gone. That night, Noor sat with the strange compass in her hand and her star map spread before her. The needle of the device pulsed softly, toward a star that hadn't yet been named. She wasn't just looking anymore. She was part of the story now. A quiet watcher of light. A dreamer of stars. The night the lighthouse spoke. The compass lay on the table, its soft pulse echoing like a heartbeat through the stillness of the observatory. Noor sat beside it, wrapped in her oversized cardigan, her legs tucked under her. The warmth of tea in her hands reminded her she was still on Earth, yet everything felt subtly different. Since the visit from the starlit stranger, the lighthouse had changed. It hummed. Not loudly, but with a low, melodic thrum, like the sound of a cello being played somewhere deep inside the walls. When the wind passed through the tower, it no longer howled, it sang. And the light atop the tower? It pulsed not just with brightness, but with purpose. Noor had begun to wonder, quietly, reverently, if the lighthouse was more than a building. Perhaps, it had a soul. That night, as stars shimmered above like scattered silver ink, Noor took the compass and climbed all the way to the lantern room, the highest point in the lighthouse. The wind was gentle, and the stars above blinked slowly, sleepily, as if they too were listening. She placed the compass on the floor. Its needle spun, once, twice, and then stilled. It pointed directly upward. Then, a vibration beneath her feet. The lighthouse sighed. Not a groan of wood or moan of old hinges, but a sound soft and low, like someone taking a breath after a long silence. Noor stood perfectly still. "Hello?" she whispered. And then, as if the lighthouse had waited all these years for someone to ask, it spoke. Not with words. Not in the way humans speak. But in memory. Suddenly, Noor's mind filled with images, scenes painted in the light of dreams. She saw ships long forgotten, their sails gleaming under moonlight. She saw old scientists standing at the very top of the tower, staring through homemade telescopes, whispering wishes to the stars. She saw storms, and calm seas. She saw children chasing fireflies in the grass below, their laughter blending with the waves. And most vividly, she saw a young girl. Herself. Drawing constellations on napkins at her grandmother's kitchen table. "You have always been listening," the lighthouse seemed to say. "You just didn't know it." Noor's eyes filled with quiet tears. She wasn't afraid. She was home. The compass pulsed once more. A soft wind wrapped around her, carrying the scent of salt and old paper. From that moment on, the lighthouse no longer felt like a place. It felt like a friend. A keeper of forgotten voices. A memory machine. It had been waiting, for her. That night, as Noor curled into her bed beneath the rounded ceiling of the observatory, the stars outside twinkled brighter than ever. And somewhere inside the old walls, the lighthouse hummed a lullaby made of moonlight and time. Tomorrow, the compass would point again. But tonight, Noor slept like someone wrapped in the arms of the universe. The star map beneath the floorboards. Noor awoke just before dawn. The sky outside was that deep, dreamy shade of blue where stars quietly fade into memory, and the sea below whispered promises of another day. She stretched slowly, like a cat who had dreamed of galaxies. The lighthouse was still humming. Not as loudly as the night before, but just enough to let her know it hadn't forgotten her. She patted across the old wooden floor in her wool socks, following the faint trail of warmth that led not upward, but down. Down the spiral staircase. Past the shelves of dusty star charts and ancient logbooks. Into the heart of the lighthouse. Here, in the lowest room, just above the foundations, was a space she rarely visited. The floor was made of wide planks, worn smooth by time and salt air. A single shaft of dawn light streamed through the narrow window, painting soft gold onto the boards. But something shimmered. Faintly. Briefly. As though light had touched something hidden. Noor knelt. Her fingers traced a nearly invisible seam between the planks. With gentle care, she pulled at the wood, and the panel lifted. Beneath it, a box. Wooden. Old, and carved with the shape of a crescent moon surrounded by tiny stars. No keyhole, no latch. Just waiting. Inside the box was a folded cloth. Noor unfolded it slowly, her hands reverent. It wasn't cloth at all, but a map. A star map. Unlike any she had seen. The constellations weren't ones she knew. Not Orion or Cassiopeia. These were older. Or perhaps newer. Maybe both. In the center was a spiral, drawn in threads of silver and midnight blue. At the very core of the spiral, a small mark. A lighthouse. This lighthouse. The map pulsed, gently. As Noor held it up to the morning light, something remarkable happened, the threads began to glow. Lines shifted. Shapes moved. The map wasn't static, it responded. It was showing her now. Showing her herself. She saw her journey, the long years of studying stars, of chasing questions no one else dared to ask. She saw her grandmother's smile, her childhood telescope, the first time she whispered a wish into the night sky. And then, she saw what came next. A path made of stars. A journey not yet taken. A whisper from the future. Noor sat still for a long time. The lighthouse's humming wrapped around her like a shawl. The sea outside turned from gray to gold. And in her hands, the map continued to shimmer, pointing not north, not south, but inward. To where the questions lived. To where dreams began. Tonight, she would climb to the very top of the tower. Not to look out, but to look within. The story was almost ready to end, or maybe, it was just about to begin again. The dream of light. Night returned like a soft breath over the sea. The stars came out one by one, quietly taking their places, as if they'd been waiting for this moment all along. Noor stood at the very top of the lighthouse, her map carefully spread across the old brass desk. Around her, the curved glass of the lantern room sparkled, catching fragments of starlight. The humming of the lighthouse was different now. Deeper. Steady. Calm. It was no longer just an echo of the sea or the wind. It was something alive. Like the lighthouse had been waiting for her to hear it properly. She placed one hand on the railing and looked out. Far across the water, the stars stretched on, glittering threads in the great cosmic loom. She took a slow breath. Then another. And then she whispered to the light. "I'm ready." The lens of the lighthouse began to turn. Not with the usual slow rotation, but a graceful, sweeping movement, like a dancer remembering their purpose. Then, a glow. Not from electricity or flame, but something softer. Older. From deep within the lighthouse's heart, a radiant beam rose, not out, but up. A pillar of silver gold light, rising into the sky like a signal. Not a warning, but a greeting. The stars shimmered. Then shimmered back. Noor stared, wide-eyed. The sky had changed. Above her, constellations she'd never seen emerged, flowing and rearranging. The map she had found beneath the floorboards was now real, alive, written across the sky in starlight. The lighthouse had not only dreamed of the stars. It had called to them. And they had answered. From that moment on, things were different. People said the lighthouse glowed at strange hours, not from its usual lamp, but with a silver hue, like moonlight remembering something sacred. Fishermen whispered of hearing music near its shore. Children dreamed of flying whales and glowing orbits. Astronomers from around the world came to visit, but no telescope could quite explain the lights they saw. Only Noor understood. Because she had listened. She had trusted the hum. She had followed the story through every quiet chapter. And in return, the lighthouse had shown her something rare. Not just how to look at the stars. But how to dream with them. Now, on quiet nights, when the world seems still and sleep hovers gently over your shoulders, remember the lighthouse. Remember Noor, the scientist who listened, the dreamer who watched, the keeper of a light that reached beyond oceans, beyond galaxies, into the very heart of wonder.